Hello and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor video. So this time we're going to be covering a very, controversial interview actually that happened surrounding the expansion. We've got a lot of topics to cover here, including the final boss, the legendary quest plans, class quests or the lack of them, hint they're probably not going to be there, the patch cycle, garrisons, PvP, PvE, a whole bunch of stuff. Now I will be doing a follow-up discussion video about this topic, because I just want to be able to sort of get all the points covered in this video, and then just be able to kind of run off on my own train of thought in the next one. Now, this is usually the kind of video I, flick on the camera for, but unfortunately it's out of batteries, and I really do want to make this because I kind of feel jazzed up for it. So, no more dilly-dallying, let's jump into the content. First of all, topic number 1, the Legendary Quest. So, the Legendary Quest is going to be rather like the one in Mists of Pandaria. You're actually going to get a Legendary Ring, and this is a part of a questline that starts at level 99. Now, a lot of elements are similar to the Mists of Pandaria questline, according to Tom Chilton, who was the guy who was interviewed, but he did say they were trying to avoid things like, say, the 6k Valor grind. Honestly, if I have to get 10 arbitrary marks of the thrice-damned Chungus of the Black Rock Depths, lower something, blah, mark of Sigil of Power, etc., then I'll just be sad. Because you know what? They said they didn't want an arbitrary thing like, oh, 6k Valor. Guess what? 10 marks of something, 10 items, a bunch of Moku Runes of Fate. That's arbitrary bollocks. It should not be a part of a legendary quest. It's creating an artificial kind of grind thingy to keep people playing more. It's not cool. So I'm a little bit bummed out about that, but we'll have to see what the details are later on. Now, one good thing that he said is that the reason they chose a ring is because there are still 2 ring slots, so your second ring can still be a thing that you can be constantly upgrading, and they will do a cool visual effect to show people that you have your swagalicious legendary ring, which is cool. He also said that, that it's very likely that there's going to be a legendary weapon, so I'm very happy to hear that. And they just want to balance things so that the workable legendary, when I say workable, I mean the quest legendary item, is kind of on a less important gear slot. So honestly, if you've got the legendary weapon, people will know that you are a badass, and hopefully that'll be something that's rather rare. Alright then, that's the legendaries covered, let's move on to the patch cycle. So, Tom Chilton said that the patch cycle will be similar to Mists of Pandaria, however some of it will depend on the time between Warlords and the next expansion. He talked about this a lot, and the timing of basically everything depending on the gap between Warlords and the next expansion. Now, he said that if they are successful and there isn't a long gap between expansions, then they may not want to have multiple raid content patches. That's literally what he said? It sounds a bit insane. I don't think he really meant one raid patch. I think he more meant instead of there being 3 raids within an expansion, maybe there being 2 and then a yearly expansion. I don't know. It came as a very bizarre sentence, and obviously one that did not clear PR. Because if that cleared PR, then the PR person needs to be fired, honestly. Now, he did say that ideally, he wants a raid tier to last around 4 to 5 months. That's what he called the sweet spot. Again, I have to refute this. I think 6 months is better for a raid tier, providing that they just have some sort of interesting content patch in between that. So basically a patch every 3 months, with the second patch being a raid tier. So yeah, I was a little bit concerned about what he said with the patch cycle. Now, he also said that they do not know how many patches there will be, and it's going to depend on what players want in the game, and also the schedule for the next expansion. Now, here's the extremely worrying thing for me. Actually, he said that Farallon is not going to be there at launch, which we knew, but he also said that there is a possibility of Farallon being there as a bit of patch content, and that the Tanaan jungle would definitely be a bit of patch content. Now, this is something that I'm going to be discussing in my follow-up video to this. Really, I just want to keep this brief, and I think I've got a decent amount to say about that, and just things in general. Okay, let's move on. So, on the topic of garrisons, he said that they might add new features to garrisons. They actually talked about internally having a transmog revamp, and that being a garrison feature that could potentially come in 6.1 or 6.2. This garrison feature would involve basically unlocking an item's appearance, similar to how it's done in Diablo 3. Then he also said that a tier 4 garrison is possible, and it's also possible to add buildings, but they do not know the specifics. Okay, so that's garrisons covered, let's talk about PvE stuff. So he said that they are internally talking about additional 5-player dungeons. I think that's absolutely the right thing to be talking about, and frankly, there needs to be more 5-player dungeons. 8's not enough. 8 is nowhere near enough. He also said that they do have some ideas for specific dungeons, and they have even talked about the idea of Time Walker dungeons, in which you could go and basically either, I don't know if it's you scaling down or the dungeon scaling up to you, but it's basically you doing old content at a relevant difficulty level for loot, which I think would be a fantastic system that I would really enjoy. Now, another thing that he said is that Warforged is going to return in many facets. Seemingly, it's going to be in raiding. I know that it's in questing, because sometimes your quest, like rewards, can actually proc, and maybe even be a blue or a purple. And finally, he said that it, of course, is going to be there in dungeons, which again is going to spice up your heroic dungeon gear. It's also going to mean that, I suppose, technically, there's a bit of a... yeah, they could maybe create some rather poor gameplay involving people just rerunning heroic dungeons constantly in the hope of getting procs. That would be rather unfortunate. Then he also said that they have went away from the direction of having a weekly item upgrade quest. I wasn't even aware they were planning on doing that, but apparently they must have mentioned it at some stage. Basically, he said that they don't feel like they actually need item upgrades because they already have the Warforged system, and they already have minor stats. Honestly, I agree. I think that item upgrades on top of that would just be insane in terms of item levels fluctuating all over the place, and the sort of inflation of item levels from tier to tier just being insane. So that's good. Now, another thing that he talked about in terms of PvE is scenarios. Scenarios are going to be a rather important part of the leveling and the story. However, they are not going to be max level queued content at launch. They're going to be putting more emphasis on dungeons and raids apparently. However, I do have to chuckle a little bit at that because we're only getting 8 dungeons. Can you smell the salt? I mean, salt is odorless, but whatever. Grr, more dungeons blocks. Anyway, so he also said that they may end up doing scenarios via patches. It just depends on what players want. Honestly, I can't imagine players wanting scenarios too much. It was a feature that was very controversial in Mists of Pandaria. Now then, that's PvE talked about. Let's move on to PvP. And I've got to say, there's just bad news here, guys. If you're a PvPer, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but there's going to be no new battleground in Warlords of Draenor, or at least they have no plans for a new battleground. Again, he said that possibly we might have one, but there are no plans. And generally, when Blizzard says no plans, they kind of do mean it. I mean, even when they say plans, half the time it doesn't even happen. But they are hoping to add a new arena at some stage, and what it's going to be is essentially the Ring of Blood, but reskinned and then sort of changed inside to reflect the Warlords of Draenor version. I'd imagine they'd be adding this in addition to the current Ring of Blood, because I don't think they'd remove that from the game. That would be an incredibly silly thing to do. And finally, for the PvP players, I've got another bit of bad news. Spectator mode is something that they liked, or they would have liked to have done, but it's not going to be there. In fact, Chilton said that they are pretty far away from having the tech, and if they were going to put it in, it would be there for more than just PvP, but it doesn't really sound like we're going to get it, at least within the first few patches of this expansion. He really did sound like it just wasn't going to be a thing. That sucks. I mean, come on, if you want to build up an esports thingy around World of Warcraft, having spectator mode and some spectator tools is just such a key thing to do, and I'm pretty sure that Blizzard do have their own in-house version of those tools that they use for, like, tournaments and stuff. Yeah. Problematic. Okay, so now we've got some talk about the delay that happened with Warlords. So basically he said that they have grown the size of the team during Mists of Pandaria, and this slowed them down in the short term. Basically, until recently, they were quite reluctant to expand the team, but during Mists, they added around 80 staff members. And the staff is definitely getting up to speed now, currently, and so they're beginning to hit their stride. I just want to say, though, that this is actually a really valid reason. I'm involved in the whole programming, software development stuff with university, and the one thing that many companies have told us is, with new staff, they generally expect it to take about 6 months until they're up and running in a sort of fast manner, and it can actually cause some delays and things when you're training up a lot of new staff, getting people used to their new workplace, the new workflow, integrating them into teams and various things like that. So absolutely, I think this is a valid reason for the expansion to be delayed. There's no bullshit here. I absolutely think that he's telling the complete truth. Now, he also said the garrisons took up more time than initially planned, because they actually have integrated garrisons more into other facets of the expansion. They're more integrated into leveling and just endgame content and lots of stuff. You know, unless they do a really big mix-up in the current beta, then honestly, I've got to say, it definitely was not worth it. No way was Garrisons worth delaying this expansion, because man, it's still, like, they're not good. They're just not good. I'm really amazed that Blizzard are putting so much into Garrisons when they're just not very good, they're not interesting, and I've not heard many beta people say, oh, Garrisons are totally going to save the game, or these are so revolutionary and amazing and new. They're not. They're so rudimentary. They're so dull. It's basically just a kind of level 100 quest hub that's got a few bells and whistles, and then of course the buildings, which do give you some really cool upgrades and like things, but on the whole, I just don't think it's really too much of a thing. It's definitely not worth maybe a few months delay in your expansion. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so finally, let's just move on to some more miscellaneous things. Now, Tom said, not really. There's the quote, when he was asked about class quests. Basically, it sounds like there are going to be no class quests in Warlords of Draenor. Obviously, he said it's possible, and they're definitely not going to be there at launch, but I mean, he kind of said that to nearly everything. So it's hard to know what's going to happen here, but I think the general consensus from what I've read amongst people is that there won't be any, and certainly he was extremely non-committal about it, and he did give off an air of, you know, they're not going to happen. So that's really sad, actually, because I would have loved the idea of class quests. I really would. I think that would have been awesome. Next, on the topic of flying, he said that, as always, it's just going to depend on how players feel. Right now, they're focused on just seeing how this one sort of patch-long experiment pans out, and then at patch 6.1, they'll start to evaluate how things are really panning out, which is fair enough. Then finally, he said that the content guide is something that they wanted for the Warlords of Draenor launch, however, it's not going to make it in for patch 6.0, and that it will possibly come in a later patch. Now, by the way, this is basically just like a guide to the current content, so it basically tells you what you can do. I suppose they're not really as relevant at the very start of an expansion, because generally people do know what to do. However, by the final tier, it's definitely nice to just have a guide that tells you what the hell's going on. Alright then, that's basically all of the major points covered. The next video that you'll see on the channel, though, really is just a companion piece for this one. And I know I could have stitched them together, but I just feel like it's the right thing to do to just split them and have one place that's all just full of, you know, the stuff from the interview, and then have the other one just be the train of thought, and also my camera will be charged by then, so you'll be able to see my face. Lucky you. Oh, jeez. Anyway, so let me know what you think about this stuff, guys. I purposefully have not talked about the final boss of Warlords of Draenor, because I think a lot of the facts inside this video do pertain to a lot of people, but I know that a number of people perhaps don't want to see who the final boss is, so I'm going to give people the choice, and I'll put that in another video with a bit of a spoiler warning, so hurrah for all of that gumph. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.